I'm gonna tell you something I've never told anyone before, and that's that inside of me are two wolves. One of them wants to make cheesy jokes and say this is the buggiest game of all time. Ha, ha, ha. But the other wolf in me is like, actually, many of the things we call bugs aren't really bugs. We just use that word kind of casually. And you know what? Let's not worry about those two wolves right now. Let's let them fight it out in the background. In the meantime, let me tell you all about Empire of the Ants, a unique new real-time strategy game which has you going to war with giant armies of ants and other insects. I think this is the kind of game that's going to be a 10 out of 10 for some people, maybe not so much for others, so let's dig deep into what this game is all about, and let's dig deep into what's so great and not great about Empire of the Ants. We got to talk about the gameplay first, which by the way, I have a complete guide for on my channel. You can check that out after this video if you want to learn more, but basically, Empire's gameplay is definitely its strongest point. It has many layers of strategy and resource management, but presents itself in a way that's easy to digest and control. The game is clearly built with controllers in mind, and really, it's great to see an RTS you don't need a mouse for. In fact, in some cases, it's even better to use a controller. We'll talk about those cases a little bit more later, but I just want to point out that the mouse and keyboard controls, they're also fine, they're good, don't worry. You take control of a single ant in third person instead of being a floating general above the battlefield, and you have all of the typical abilities you'd expect out of a real-time strategy game. So that means you build and upgrade your units, your structures, you activate special powers in and out of combat, and you fight for territory across the map, which can help you generate more resources so that in turn you can generate a bigger army and more structures. There's always a lot to do, there's always a lot to keep track of, and the ant you control has great mobility. She has a super fast sprint and she can leap around a lot, so you always want to be scouting with her as much as possible, and you always want to make use of her pheromone powers, which give buffs or heals to your troops. Now in general, you're looking to spread your empire across the map as much as you can, and you want to find these nests because they act as base expansions. There's only so much you can build inside of a nest before you hit a cap, so the game is always pushing you to expand, which will naturally create conflicts with your opponents. The core system behind the gameplay is rock, paper, scissors like, with most units having a specific advantage and disadvantage depending on who they're facing. I think that all of these systems combine effortlessly and they're easy to execute, so the game really challenges you to focus on your strategy. It makes you worry about your strategic thinking and not so much about the controls or how to execute your vision. And so by that token, matches can feel hectic and slow at the same time, but in a good way. So hectic because there's always a lot to do, a lot to keep track of, and slow because sometimes the scale of the warfare is huge. Well, I mean, it's not huge, you're tiny insects, but it's huge for the insects. So sometimes they have to cover a lot of ground to get to somewhere. So you always feel like you have enough time to execute your plans in Empire of the Ants, but there's always something impacting those plans, requiring you to make adjustments on the fly. For example, this could be related to the weather, which has different effects on gameplay, or you could even run into things like a big NPC predator on a map, such as a spoopy spider. You don't want spoopy spiders eating up all your ants. I really love how the core game plays, and while it's not the most complex strategy game in the world, there's plenty to sink your teeth into. The structure of the game lends itself well to epic tug-of-war style battles, and the limited building room for each nest helps create unique combat scenarios by ensuring everyone playing has to have specific focuses. It might sound weird to say, but you feel like this game is restricting you at all times in a way that actually guides you and helps you focus, not in a way that removes your freedom to do what you want with your army. There's just so many great moments in gameplay, whether it's defending or attacking a nest, fighting over a food source on the map, or sprinting as fast as you can possibly sprint to a specific point on the battlefield because maybe you forgot to do something like me, or maybe you just have to adapt to an ever-changing scenario. And most importantly, it's just fun to play Empire of the Ants, and I think that's the best praise you can give a game. I'm sitting here actively wanting to play this game for fun outside of making content for it. And again, if you want to have a more in-depth look at the gameplay systems, check out the full guide on my channel after this video. Now let's move on and talk about the weakest part of the game, or at least weakest for me. Unfortunately, I did not end up finishing the 20-hour plus campaign because it completely lost me with its lack of focus and unexpected gameplay and graphical anachronisms. I played about half of the campaign. And keep in mind that every review is just an opinion and this one is mine, so what didn't work for me might work for you. You might end up hearing things from this review that are like, oh, that's not so bad, I'm okay with that, or oh, that sounds good to me. The campaign has you following the story of a specific ant empire's trials and tribulations, and the game is based on a popular French book of the same name. Well, at least in English. Now, I'm not super familiar with the source material here, so I can't speak to how lore accurate it is, whether it follows the book exactly, or how it handles potentially beloved characters. I don't really know that world, so I can't speak to that. but what I can speak to is the overall experience it presents as a video game. The missions seem to have a lot of variety. You're going to see everything from exploration to combat to platforming to stealth. Yes, that's right, this game has ant stealth. But where the campaign fell flat for me is the overall design of these missions, to the point of me actively not wanting to spend my time on them. You have this really excellent and unique playing game with outrageously gorgeous visuals, and yet you're playing missions that were designed with the sensibilities of a much older era of gaming. For example, you've got things like timed escort missions or missions where you're hunting for small things in the environment, also sometimes with a timing component, and these kinds of missions completely kill the momentum of the game for me. And while they're never offensively bad or terrible or anything like that, they just didn't seem like a fun use of time for me, especially when the core of the game is so much fun. I think it's great that the devs tried to add lots of variety into the campaign, but the fact that it's pulling you out from the thing that you want to be constantly doing, that's just a little too much for me. But it's not all doom and gloom. You still have awesome combat missions in the campaign as well, and you don't have to literally do every single mission to progress. I appreciate that the dev team for this game isn't humongous and they're just trying to give you maximum value, but this time around, it didn't work for me personally. But hey, if you love the vibes of the game and just want to spend more time in Empire's world, or you simply don't mind these design choices and limitations, you can still have a great time. And I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about that, because the interactive nature of games makes them age completely differently than other storytelling formats. Not every game design choice can be timelessly good, and what was considered an amazing game 30 years ago might not necessarily still be fun to play today. It might be, but more likely than not, it won't be. Anyway, that's just a much bigger topic for another time. Next, we got to talk about the graphics. I mean, folks, this game looks gorgeous and it runs really well on my PC. I have a pretty modern setup. It's not top of the line anymore, but it's pretty high end. So everything from the textures to lighting and animation is bursting with hyperrealism. It's fantastic to see. It's visually impressive. We could get into all of the nitty gritty here, but there's no real need because, I mean, you're already looking at it. Empire of the Ants is a visual feast, and it's the kind of game you can show your grandma and be like, look, grandma, isn't it crazy how games look now? And she'll pause for a second and act like it's the most mind-blowing thing in the world, or she'll snap and be like, shut up, change the channel to my favorite soap opera. I mean, every grandma is different. We shouldn't assume, right? But the point is, Empire here is the kind of game you want to show people. Even if you don't like looking at insects, this game somehow manages to overcome that ick factor that some people could have. It's just that impressive. So in terms of running it on my computer, like I said, I didn't really have any issues, and it comes bundled with plenty of graphical settings options and DLSS in case you need to make some tweaks. On consoles though, unfortunately, I think you need to get a PS5 Pro just to get 60 FPS, so that's not awesome. And while the game looks amazing, there's two issues you should know about. Now, this first one, it might be a your mileage may vary kind of thing. And the thing is that no matter what configuration I set with my settings on my TV, on my computer, on the game settings, no matter what I did, the difference between light and dark areas was just too much. The game is so hyper-realistic that when you're an ant in the shadow of a big rock or a big plant or something, it's just too real. It's super dark and hard to see, and that's not fun. And I know some people might be like, well, it probably is your screen not being calibrated properly, or this setting here, or this and that, but no. This is the only game I've ever had this problem in. I have spent countless hours calibrating my TV and getting the perfect settings for everything because I'm kind of a bit of a crazy person about that. So yeah, that was just weird, but again, it could just be something about my setup. Fortunately though, the combat maps are designed in a way where you don't really run into this issue. It's more of a campaign problem. The other visual issue I think that's worth calling out is the visual clutter and noise. For a game so beautiful, it sure has crazy UI clutter. Yeah, you can make the UI smaller, and in fact, I highly recommend you do that right away because otherwise it takes up way too much of the screen. But even with that, you'll still end up with situations where there's just way too many icons on screen and they're moving around, and it's detracting from the actual graphical quality of the game, which is spectacular. Now, obviously there's a million different ways to solve this, but they're all expensive. They all require building more UI elements or more tunable UI elements, or, giving you more UI options. And I know that that's a big ask for a team that's not a AAA size team. Still though, I think it's really worth pointing out that although this game looks spectacular and beautiful, it's almost like the UI is trying to be like, hey, stop paying attention to that. You should only pay attention to me. Now let's move on to the controller versus mouse and keyboard talk. So I think it's important to note that this game plays like an absolute dream on a controller. It's very much designed for it. The whole game, everything about it, from the interface to how the actual gameplay handles. you're never going to be fighting the controls. In fact, the controller is much better for a number of things like fine-tuning your movement and platforming, since you're going to have that detailed analog control over your ant. It beats mouse and keyboard in this regard for sure. So for campaign play, especially during the platforming or exploration levels, you definitely want your controller. But when it comes to the sheer speed of inputs and actions per minute, of course, the keyboard and mouse is going to be better. So if you're super serious about your rank or about PvP in this game, maybe you want to play this with a mouse and keyboard. You don't really need that fine platforming control in PvP most of the time. But I think the difference isn't that big. This isn't like StarCraft, where if you tried to play it with a controller, you would be decimated in seconds by a mouse and keyboard. This game is built around the controller, and you can easily use it against mouse and keyboard and have a good time. Alright, now let's move on and talk about the value. So regardless of whether or not the campaign is up your alley, you can fight against the AI just in custom games, and of course there's an online multiplayer. Unfortunately for me, I didn't get a chance to play against any humans since I played this game ahead of release. That's when I'm making this video, and it's a damn shame because I'm really excited to do that. There's going to be a multiplayer ranking system in place, and I think the dynamic combat of this game will lend itself really well to playing with or against friends and maybe even strangers. So the question I want to pose to you is, what would you come to this game for? If you're like me and you're not hooked by the campaign, there's certainly less value on paper. But if you like to play strategy games for their gameplay and you want to check out a really unique one, you will still get plenty of bang for your buck here. But if you don't really have an interest in PvP multiplayer or fighting the AI, and the campaign kind of doesn't seem appealing to you, then this might not be the game you're looking for. I don't like to hand out review scores because the number is nowhere near enough information to actually say what you mean about a product like this, but if I did, here's how I would break it down for you. For me, this game would be 3 out of 5 stars. I love playing it, but I would want a more complete package that's to my personal taste with a better campaign. The gameplay is just so good and fun that it keeps this hypothetical score up for me. At the end of the day, this is a game I simply enjoy playing and want to keep playing. So the super fancy graphics or the campaign shortcomings, they don't really change that for me. But I am a little bit disappointed that a major part of this product doesn't live up to the hype for my personal taste. Regardless, there's a great novelty in the uniqueness of the game, and I love seeing games try to do something different. I just think that the overall product package could have been much better, at least for my specific taste, but it's still a great time. I still love playing it, and I'm still going to keep playing it. But anyway, I hope you see what I mean when I say the number doesn't really tell the whole story, because if you just said 3 out of 5 in a vacuum, that doesn't sound so great. That sounds like a 6 or a 7 out of 10, doesn't it? That's not the best. But that would be me talking about the whole product in an almost academic fashion. At the end of the day, I just want to keep playing this game because I'm having a good time with it, and I also think it could have been better. But anyway, what do you think about Empires of the Ants? Tell me in the comments below. I want to know all of your thoughts about this game. Let's get a big discussion going. And don't forget to check out my complete guide to the game if you're interested. It's probably up on screen right now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.